Good evening and welcome to another episode of Law and Order, a program where we discuss a lot of issues pertaining to the laws of our country. We discussed previously on our episode about the consumer law or the Consumer Act. How does this all happen? What are the things that come under the Consumer Act? And also today joining me for this continuation of the topic consumer law or Consumer Act is Mr. Prashant Dalal, who is President's Counsel, senior lawyer and a thorough gentleman who knows inside out about the Consumer Act. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Yeah. Prashant, we did talk about various things that we can discuss on how the Consumer Law acts. But there are a few things that we would like to continue before we go into the part of how the Consumer Law Act really comes. On display of especially the goods in terms of bills, receipts, invoices, how does this all happen?
Yes. Very interestingly, the receipt is the one, Kosala, that gives you the power as a consumer. But that's the place that you prove your connection to the particular shop. Good example would be that you go and buy a packet of milk. It can be from any place. So natural allegation is, no, you did not buy from my place. You are trying to put me in trouble because there is a competitor who wants to put you in trouble. So I mean, it can be two different milk and they can make that kind of allegation. So this very, very crucial important thing is the receipt. But regrettably in Sri Lanka, naturally receipt is not a mandatory thing. But the section 28 says that if you on demand, that's the word used, you must and you should give a receipt, and if you don't give a receipt on demand, Kosala, it's an offense. Why? Because there are pollers, you just take a poller, and in a poller you sell vegetables by a poor vendor, so you don't get a receipt in that sense, because if it is a receipt under section 28, you need to have a quantity, you must have the quality, you must have the name, the brand, that normally what we see in this printed thing with a code. So that cannot be done by a poor trader at a poller. So that is why they kept it discretionary. So that therefore on demand that you get it. Now earlier I remember in the public transport they never issued a ticket, but that ticket gives you, if there is an accident, in order to get compensation, the ticket, bus ticket would be the authority to the proof that you traveled in this particular bus and you met with an accident. So it is vital in every aspect of the law, but interestingly it is on demand that you get it.
So when you say on demand, so for example, I go to, leave the polar aside, you go to a normal silver merchant or a boutique in Colombo, where you very rarely get a receipt for whatever you
Exactly.
take. So I demand a receipt.
Yes.
So he doesn't have like a bill book or a registered invoice book, but he just writes it on a paper. So much of dal, so much of rice, so much. So is that acceptable?
Yes. Section interestingly 28 in particular says that you must say the quantity, the name, and there is a list. Now you can't expect, because if you go to a normal,
but there's no name of the trader.
Exactly. It's
just a list saying so much of dal, so much of
his handwriting, and if he or she denies, then you can go to the EQD, examination of question documents. Consumer Affairs Authority has that power to take handwriting samples if he or she denies, because if that is the case, the Consumer Affairs Authority will go and arrest him, and then he can deny, and then of course that long process of a normal criminal trial of EQD, of comparing of handwritings will take place. So,
and another thing that we've seen is, apart from the bill books, the receipts, there's something that some traders give a receipt saying on approval.
Yes.
The receipt books is on approval, but no name, nothing.
Exactly.
So is that
even that would can be construed as a receipt, because that gives you a description of your good and things like that. Because in the kind of electronic goods, there is something called warranties. That is something there even in the Consumer Affairs Authority Act, and you must, if then there is a warranty, that you are supposed to fulfill that warranty. And if there is a service agreement that is there incorporated in the product, that has to be done with during that period of warranty and this. So it's a wide and a very comprehensively covered course in that context.
And also something that you need to do is labeling, isn't it? Like say you need to label your goods.
Yes, and say not every, say it's a fish, you can't label a fish, right? But then if you have an interesting counter, you can have a counter with how much you will charge for a
100 grams,
100 grams or whatever.
Yeah.
Now that means a trade list. So not each particular product need not have a label, but like a normal boutique will say, you could see Halgonia, you will see that, stick with the price, right? So, but you must have the price. That's very clear law, and that's very clear, and I would say section 26, which very categorically says that the trader must and should have a list, and even he should have a notice board giving all the directions that must be there. So, and also I like to stress here at this point of time, there is something called standards, Sri Lanka standards. Now, if you take a water bottle Kosala, you have a SLS standard label there. That means that is the standard stipulated by the Sri Lanka Standard Association. Now, that standard can be incorporated into the Consumer Affairs Authority direction. So, those directions must be displayed in the shop. That's what the law says. There should be a notice board displaying all the Consumer Affairs Authority direction. You sometimes hardly see it, but that is the law.
Like say, if say SLS, ISO certified, all that comes in
a particular thing, yes.
I think we will now move on, Prashant. Now, how does, for example, there's a violation of this Consumer Law Act. Somebody has been misled or not been given the proper services or the good items. How does he or she start acting on this?
Certainly, it is the Consumer Affairs Authority. Naturally, is the authority. As as we said in the previous program, it's the Food Act that is not the Consumer Affairs area. That is the health authorities, PHI, and they should be complained to. In fact, they must raid those places, but even otherwise, you see a particular restaurant not complying it, you can call the PHI and complain. That is about the food aspect, which I like to stress. Now, that cannot be handled by the Consumer Affairs Authority Act. But otherwise, you can always call the hotline and get to the Consumer Affairs Authority Act, and they would take over. Now, good example, my shoes broke after a few days. Now, I go to the boutique and they say, no, I can't replace. So, what you should do is immediately call the Consumer Affairs Authority, and if you have the receipt, there is proof, you hand over them. And what the law says is that they will call this particular trader and ask them to replace this. That's what is normally done. I mean, no trader can give you 100% guarantee or whatever. So, there is a diplomatic and a first base system there, where the Consumer Affairs Authority will try to settle, not in that sense settle, or to compensate and try to find a solution to this by allowing a replacement to that. If not, well, as I said, all what we discussed at the last program and today, these are the offences under this one. So, they will have an inquiry into this, investigation into this, and also then file charges in the magistrate courts.
Yeah. So, when you talk about investigations, inquiries, who conducts it? Is it the consumer authorities that?
Exactly. There are specialized officers now being brought in. Earlier they call it price control inspectors, now no more. That was under the Price Control Act they had, when we were small. There was people who would just jump in to see the prices are that. But now it's completely Consumer Affairs Authority officers who are now district based. So, they would take over the investigation, they would take evidence, they would record statements. And if, as I said before, if you can't settle, then they would go inquiry, and if they have violated any offense, they would file charges against maybe that trader, maybe that branch manager. But as I said even in the last program, our law is very clear under section 67. If it is a body corporate or a company, the directors, the managers, every one of them get liable to be punished unless they were due diligent. They have taken all steps to prevent it.
Yeah. So, we talk about goods, we talk about food. how does this apply especially for services? Now, for example, I go to take medicine from a doctor. I've been diagnosed wrong. I've been given the wrong medicine. That's not what I wanted. And I continue to have the same ailment, the same thing. So then I consult another doctor. And he says, okay, you've been misled. This is not what you're having. This is what you do. Then what is the act that I can take against the previous doctor?
Very interesting. That is, as I said on the last program, the Consumer Affairs Authority has the power over services. But when we sat, as I said, I was a founder member of the Consumer Affairs Authority. In 2003, we took a very policy decision because this should be referred to the particular professional body, because they are more competent, like say medical thing. The Consumer Affairs Authority don't have the expertise to understand whether this one is better or this method better, whether the test done was adequate. There was a case in Sri Lanka which is called Priyani Soiza versus Arsakulatna.
Yes.
It went up to the Supreme Court. They said, at the end of it, they said that you don't need to do all the tests that is there, right? So it was taken in favor of the doctors. So likewise, it is a debatable issue, and therefore this kind of thing, even lawyers, how the ethics and how the court functions is not in the purview or the expertise of the Consumer Affairs. So in this kind of a situation, they will refer that to the particular professional body, like this, if it is a lawyer, Supreme Court, and this, and the instance you mentioned, to the medical council. So they will have an inquiry. Now that inquiry is all about, disenrolling. They can't prosecute them. So, but if, as you said, if they were negligent, I like to repeat negligent, that's a criminal offense. Negligent is that you have a duty of care to your neighbor, you call it, and beyond compensation. Who is your neighbor? One who is get affected. That's the definition of the neighbor, not the person next door. It's the one who get affected. So in that kind of a context, they can go to a criminal offense under 298 if it's murder, death, 325, 326 of the penal code. So that is, the police will take over. And you always have a right to go to the district court for compensation. For the whatever effect that had on you, you can go to the district court for compensation. So there is a wide variety and a wide variety of choices that a person has if there is a violation of, like what you mentioned.
Well, another thing that I would want to find out, now a lot of things, a lot of cases that we hear, especially in the construction field, where you get a contractor, right? Yeah, you hire a contractor for maybe building your house or whatever, and then the contractor obviously would go to get stuff from various vendors, various people, and then if those item, for example, you say steel bars, are not in a proper quality, not the proper thing, and I, as the person building the building or the house, who do I take action against? Is it the contractor, or
also is about the quality of the cement or whatever?
Whatever. So for example, if it's not up to the standards of the steel bars and all.
Yes, yes.
So I'm just asking whether these things also can come into the Consumer Act.
Certainly, any service or quality of things can come under the Consumer Affairs
Because you mentioned
Authority.
about standards in our previous
Certainly, because there is a Sri Lankan standards can be incorporated into the standard association under the direction of the Consumer Affairs Authority. It's a very all composite act that we have. So in that kind of a context, it is about the products. But if it's negligence on the part of the builder of not using them in a correct proportion, like cement and water or whatever, the sand in that correct proportion, then of course it is the negligence and the incompetence of this contractor. So there is always a contractors association, and of course, as I said, the negligence, and you can ask for compensation, because life is at risk. You don't have to have even a house collapsing, but if you find that it is in the process, in the future there is a possibility of collapsing, then of course still you can go and use that criminal law, and if you can prove, that's a problem. You can, how you prove whether the real mixture was used is a very interesting scenario, because that's only within the purview of the contractor, not you and I as a customer. So these are the interesting technical, practical issue that can come up. but then still the law is there, fully open for many choices.
Coming back, you did mention about the consumer authorities first of all intervening and trying to settle things down, maybe as you said, to replace goods for a broken shoe or whatever, and then just seal the case off. But if it doesn't settle from that point, what is the next step that happens?
Of course, as I said, Consumer Affairs will file a case.
Yeah.
And it's a criminal
that's what
offense.
I was saying. Who files a case? Then
It's the Consumer Affairs Authority.
Is it the Consumer Authority or is it the complaint person?
No. Anything, Kosala, in our field of law, it is the complaint you make. Say, you hit me now. I go to the police and I become a witness. And the state take over the prosecution against you. That's the concept of criminal law. That the offence is not committed against that person, but against the state. Same in the Consumer Affairs Authority Act. That it is the offence against the state. So, it is the Consumer Affairs Authority who will take over the case and file the case under the section 136 of the Criminal Procedure Code, right, who has the right to do that.
So, it comes, then you file the case. So, where are these cases been heard? Because we have various courts, district court.
It is the magistrate courts. Consumer Affairs Authority is all about magistrate court. Actually, magistrate court is a very interesting court which deals with your traffic, even Mosquito Breeding Act, EPF, ETF, you name it. Whatever is connected to people, a lot of have a misconception, magistrate court, lower court. No, that's a court which deals with day-to-day life, Kosala, you and I, we all have to go to court.
So, for example, this obviously you have magistrate courts in various areas.
Yeah.
And all that. So does this, for example, if this Consumer Affairs Authority case is filed in, we say in Ratnapura or someplace. So, where does this case being heard? For example, I am the person who is filing the complaint to the Consumer Affairs. I live in Ratnapura, but my goods and services have been provided by somebody in, for example, say in Kandy.
Yeah.
Then how does it?
Of course, the offence is committed in Kandy. Very good question.
Yeah.
I have gone to Kandy for a trip or holiday. Yeah. Then I buy some yogurts to give it to my children, and it happens in Kandy. So jurisdiction is Kandy, not where I reside. Yeah. The offence, where the offence was committed, that is where the jurisdiction is. Exact jurisdiction occurs in the place where the offence was committed. That's our law. So you can't go away. I mean, unfortunately, you may have to travel all the way for a yogurt case to Kandy.
Yeah, but it's where the offence
is committed,
and that's the magistrate court that will hear that case.
Exactly.
Right. So okay, we come to the courts. Then obviously he's found guilty of that. Then what happens?
Of course, there is a punishment, sentence, and if you are a trader, your name can be published under certain things. So it's a huge reputational risk that is there, because the Consumer Affairs Authority has the power to publish the name of the company. So it's a huge reputational risk for the company. So there is a very it's a fine in grave cases, imprisonment, and I like to stress, Consumer Affairs Authority, they can call witnesses, right? Now they have the power of like a district court, and if you don't come, it's like contempt of court. And so such a power has, like a police, like that, they have the power to call witnesses. So that's a fully comprehensive authority that has all the mighty powers to look after the interest of the consumer affairs, of the right of the consumer, protect the consumer, every aspect. And this law is beautiful, it covers all aspects.
Now there was an interesting case that I came across once, which I saw, which I read out. There was this particular company who had been selling, I don't know, obviously there was a rule that came out in Sri Lanka that you can't use the 5-pin plug cords for things, and it has to be 13 ampere plug cords. So this particular company, a big name company, had been selling the 5-amp, and they've been raided and found out, and they were taken into court for doing that. Is this also something to do with the consumer affairs?
Certainly. I wonder whether it can be a separate act, which I am not sure. Yeah. But there are certain acts that governs Electricity Act. Yeah. You know what I mean? There is an act called Electricity which governs electricity, and that governs how electricity is supplied and all that. So, it may be under that, which I am not sure, but then certainly if you give the customer with a deceiving thing that it is can be used in Sri Lanka, that can come under the deception and misleading. So, that is definitely a offence under our law, which is section 30.
Prashant, another thing, we talked about these offences and also obviously does this also come under does it going under criminal law?
This is criminal law. You fine, you jail, you magistrate courts, and there is, when you go to the magistrate courts, you have to give bail, right? You are arrested, Consumer Affairs Authority arrest you. They sometimes raid, imagine there is expiry goods stolen at a place or there is hoarding happens. There you go and arrest a person then and there, because this is a offence that can be arrested. We call it a cognizable offence. So, that is a very powerful one, and therefore, it is crime because bail is given and you have to get bail and then come to courts, and it is like a normal criminal.
Another thing now, this is obviously something that we would really love to know. Now, when a case is heard for the first time in magistrate court, does the verdict come the same day, or does it go on and on and on?
Interesting. No, not at all. If you plead guilty, that is another matter.
Yeah.
Most of the time, most of the consumer affairs cases, the practicality is that you plead guilty and then get the minimum fine. But then some people go to trial. Now, the trial can take some time because it takes, you have to have the prosecution case, end of it you have to have a defense case. So, that takes some time, and that maybe expert evidence has to be laid, like expiry, the product, if it is like can have to be sent to the government and list to see whether it is bad, it's like bad to the consumption, if it is addictive or preservative, which is violating the regulation, that has to be sent to the government and list. So, it is a process that if you do not plead guilty, and that takes time, of course, in Sri Lanka.
I think, Prashant, we have been really talking very interesting topics. So, I think something that we are really interested to, because as Prashant mentioned, everybody is a consumer. So, with that, it is really important to get all these details. Because recently there was a consumer day as well. They do have a
of
consumer.
Course, certainly. Because the world is a very interesting one, Kosala, because this is consumer. Now, Sri Lanka lacks, there are political organization that comes on TV and that is made politics, consumer to protect consumers. That is, to me, in Sri Lanka is very political. But actual sense, there must be consumer organization at every village maybe to protect. Then we will have better competition, better products, better service. So, the day the civil society must take over this issue, not politically based. All of us who are like in a particular area, maybe even a street, let us organize a consumer affairs authority society who goes and look after the consumer. That is the way the other countries work, and that is the way we should go forward, Kosala.
Well, just before we wind things up, since you brought up the topic, because it is an international thing. For example, what happens if something, I go overseas, if you can put it in a nutshell, go overseas and purchase a good and it is not up to standard, but I am back in Sri Lanka, and then is there any way that I can act on it?
You have to go back to the country.
There is no other.
You can't do that here in our country, no, because Sri Lanka law is very clear. Consumer Affairs Authority Act, even
but if you have an international warranty or something?
Then again you have to go and get it implemented there. No, of course, you can't get it from here unless there is an agency here. Then of course, generally what happens is you go to the agent here, they may look after it because they want to protect the brand.
I think these things are very interesting because people need to really find out how they can really act on things. Prashant, before we wind things up, anything particular that you would want to give our viewers?
Yes, what I want to say at this point is that we all are consumers, and it is us who has to be alert, it is us who has to be educated, and we have to organize ourselves in order to protect the consumer. So, it should not be politically based, it is us who should, society, civil society must get together, be aware of it and fight for our rights and support the government, which is, the law is fantastic, we must support the government with the Consumer Affairs Authority to get it done.
Well, thank you very much, Prashant, for joining us on our episode of Law and Order and giving a very good inside information about how the consumer law or the Consumer Law Act and the consumer authorities really act on when there is a need. So thank you very much.
Thank you
Prashant.
so much. Thank you so much.
Well, with that, we come to the conclusion of another episode of Law and Order. Hope you enjoyed our program with some very informative information about the Consumer Affairs Act. So till we meet again with our next episode of Law and Order, it's good night to you.